Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are doing a Punjabi folktale. We have covered two folk tales from Punjab before, in episode 63 and episode 93. Check out the links in the show notes to those stories. They both featured some kind of a quest, sort of like a hero's journey, like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars or the hobbits in The Lord of the Rings. Today's story is a little different. It's not an adventure or a quest of any kind. It's just a story about a king who learns an important life lesson from a child. It begins with a king. This king, let's call him Raja, because Raja literally means king in several Indian languages. Amongst the kings that we have seen on the show, Raja was quite unusual in that he had never told a lie. It's not that he was unfamiliar with the concept, it's just that he had never committed the actual act of speaking a falsehood. Ever. He had one other habit, that of going into town incognito. Maybe putting on a disguise and walking on the streets amongst all the citizens was a way to escape the pressures of palace life. Or maybe he just got the idea from Emperor Akbar, who did this often to learn about his subjects. But yeah, instead of doing his actual job, which totally included hiring scouts he could trust to be his eyes and ears on the rough streets, Raja decided that he would be his own eyes and ears on the streets. So on this day, Raja was walking down a dark alley in a particularly nasty part of town. There were some shadows at the other end. There were 4 people there, and some voices. Raja clutched his dagger tightly as he approached. He didn't want to suddenly change direction. That might trigger the predator instinct if these people were there to mug him. He kept getting closer and then breathed a sigh of relief. The 4 people were just some children. 4 young girls, in fact, gossiping. He thanked his stars for having had such a lucky escape. And then he realized something which made him feel proud. The security he provided in his kingdom allowed 4 young girls to fearlessly stand about in a dark alley in the nasty part of town. That was not bad at all. He should probably start a publicity campaign about this. But first, he had to make sure these weren't just some criminals pretending to be young girls. Imagine the embarrassment if his publicity campaign were brought down by a public realization that the girls the king claimed to be keeping safe were in fact a gang called the Felonious Female Four, or some other alliterative criminal gang name. He eavesdropped on the group. Hiding behind a very smelly trash can and listening intently to every word, he made 2 decisions. One was to have a chat with his sanitation minister. This trash can had obviously not been picked up quickly enough. For the other decision, let's listen in to see how the conversation went. The conversation seemed to be about which experience was the most fulfilling, the most rewarding, or the sweetest. which was a strange thing to expect from four girls who were probably not even teenagers yet. The king didn't know any of the girls, so he remembered them by things they wore. So one girl, whom the king called Yellow Shoes, launched into a violent defense of her position that the sweetest, most rewarding experience was alcohol. That caught the king by surprise. He was close enough to see that the girls were clearly not above the legal drinking age. But then another girl, Red Ribbons, broke in and said, no, the sweetest thing in the world was the taste of meat. That surprised the king, because the girl was dressed in the traditional clothes of a well known tribe in the area, a tribe that was strictly vegetarian. Now, I know there are many variations of vegetarian you have heard of, so I'll clarify that this whole tribe was the kind of strict vegetarian who would not eat eggs and would get uncomfortable even being in the proximity of meat eaters. The king, who by now should have expected another shock, totally did not expect another shock. But he did get exactly that when the third girl, Blue Hat, said that love was the most rewarding experience of all. The king considered dashing out of his hiding spot to arrange some sort of help for these girls, when the fourth one spoke up. Green Dupatta said that alcohol, meat, love, all of that was nothing compared to the experience of telling lies. Raja considered that. He was most disturbed by that last statement. Alcohol and meat was okay because they would bring in substantial revenue for the kingdom via duties and taxes. Even love was great for business. But lying? That was so unpredictable. If the next generation believed that lying was rewarding, what did that do for the moral fiber of society? He changed his mind about arranging immediate help for the girls. He decided he needed to hear their side of the story before ordering beheadings. Only 2 episodes ago, he had heard a lot of examples of kings acting in haste. Raja's first act was to ask his secretary to summon the four girls. What four girls? Asked his puzzled secretary. Go bother someone else for the details, the king replied. That led to a frantic search of the kingdom's database to understand whom the king was talking about. Finally, the secretary realized that Raja's incognito mode route had taken him right past the hangout of a gang known as the Gossip Girl Gang. Not a criminal gang by any means, but just a local philosophy interest group. The Gossip Girls were summoned to the palace. Understandably, they were all very nervous. And when the king asked them to stop fidgeting, it only made them even more nervous. The king decided that the best thing to do here was to talk to them, one on one, and optionally in the presence of something that would make them comfortable. Yellow Shoes chose to answer questions only in the presence of her teddy bear. After having someone fetch it for her, the king asked, Now will you answer my questions? The girl nodded reluctantly. I heard you in the alley last night, the king began. I wasn't there. I was home, in bed. You have me confused with someone else. It was probably the other girls. And anyway, I was practically silent yesterday. It was the others, they started it.
Relax, said the king. I'm not going to punish you. I just want to understand something that you did say. You said alcohol is the sweetest of all experiences.
That I did, and I stand by it, the girl replied.
How did you come to your conclusion? Have you ever tasted alcohol?
Raja asked her. Oh, never. The girl was shocked at even just the suggestion.
Then how can you know that it's sweeter than anything else?
The king asked. Just because I haven't experienced it firsthand doesn't mean I can't draw conclusions from it. There is overwhelming circumstantial evidence. When the king seemed unable to comprehend that, she added, Look, I haven't experienced at first hand the distance to the neighboring towns, but I do know which one is the farthest based on observing other people. I can say that Amritsar is closer than Ludhiana because people who travel to Ludhiana generally take longer to return. But I've never myself been to Amritsar or Ludhiana. She paused for a breath and then continued. It's the same principle in this situation. I haven't tasted alcohol myself, but I know the effect it has on people. For example, when my dad and my uncle drink, they are in excellent spirits at the time. They do things that they normally wouldn't. And just looking at them, you can tell they're having the time of their lives. But the thing that convinced me is actually their behavior the next day. They wake up in the morning with a terrible headache and swear never ever to drink again. Doing it, they look very sincere too. And yet, by evening, they begin drinking again. The king heard her out and said,
Do you realize that in all that description, nothing about what you said supports alcohol being sweet? Let me clear it up for the record. It's absolutely not sweet. But I'll allow it because you might have meant sweet metaphorically. Indeed, I believe it to be the most rewarding experience, despite the terrible headaches. Yellow Shoes replied. Well, I can't say I support your point of view,
The king said.
I have to make sure the Minister of Propaganda does something about this to discourage indiscriminate alcohol consumption.
With that, he excused her and had the next Gossip Girl gang member brought in. The king's conversation with Red Ribbons began almost identically with the one we have just seen, so I'll skip the common bits. Red Ribbons, after receiving her security blanket, defended her position by saying that yeah, she was a member of so and so tribe, and no one in that tribe ever ate any meat. But she had come to her conclusion from observing others, just as her fellow gossip girl had done. Specifically, Red Ribbons had seen a butcher's shop. I'll spare you all the gory details, she said. But from what I have seen, not a single bit of any meat is allowed to go to waste. The butcher is careful to scrape every bit out. And even when the bones are discarded, the dogs fight over them to get at whatever bits are left in between little nooks and crannies on the bone. Why would dogs and humans alike scrape for every bit of meat if it weren't the most rewarding experience? She asked.
There's something in what you're saying, the king said. But, the dogs could be fighting for the bone itself, not for the bits of meat.
But if that's the case, why does the bone never go away? If dogs wanted to eat the bone should disappear after a while. But that never happens.
Maybe you didn't observe them long enough. Maybe it hasn't happened in your lifetime yet.
That doesn't make sense, the girl replied. I'm not old enough, but I've observed a lot of dogs. So, statistically speaking, at any point, some of the bones or whatever's left of them should disappear.
All right, point taken, I concede, said the king. Send in the next one, please.
Blue Hat was next. Raja expected that this one would be the easiest to explain. Blue Hat had probably watched way too many Bollywood movies. After the initial pleasantries, the king asked her,
So, do you think love is the sweetest experience of all? You probably think love makes the world go round and all that?
But Blue Hat snapped back. What rubbish! No, love doesn't make the world go round. I've looked it up. The world goes around because of the law of conservation of angular momentum. And I know what you're thinking. How can I know what love is? But I do. My mother had the most painful experience recently when my baby brother was born. Despite everything, she cherishes the moment she first saw the baby. The only reason she was doing that was out of love. Love must be the sweetest experience of all, if she thinks it was worth going through all that pain.
I hear you, the king said, and especially that flavor of maternal love. And I especially appreciate that because you didn't get that idea from the plot of a Bollywood movie.
Blue Hat was dismissed, and it was Green Dupatta's turn. After all the usual preamble, Green Dupatta said that she stood by her statement. The emotion one experiences when lying is something that tops everything else, including alcohol, meat, and love.
You speak from experience, do you? Asked the king.
Haven't you experienced it yourself, Your Majesty? Green Dupatta countered.
Me? I've never told a falsehood in my life,
The king replied, surprised at even the suggestion. Well then, let me demonstrate it to you, Green Dupatta said. But seeing how eager the king looked, she added that he would have to be patient for a year, and he would have to finance her project. He wanted a demonstration, didn't he? The king agreed. He bankrolled Green Dupatta's secret project. No questions asked. He also decided to judge the project only by its result. A year later, at the appointed date and time, the king showed up at Green Dupatta's home, which was now a mansion, thanks to the king's funding. Raja marveled at the magnificent architecture of this mansion. It was the best his money could buy. The mansion seemed centered on one great hall in the middle. Green Dupatta began. Spare no expense, Your Majesty. nothing but the best on this project.
What's in the Great Hall? Don't tell me you have created dinosaurs,
The king asked. No, nothing so dull and boring. It's only the most marvelous ceiling artwork. There isn't anything like this anywhere in the world. It's magical,
like real magic.
the king asked.
I didn't know that was a thing. This story has been realistic so far. And suddenly you've introduced a supernatural element here?
And why not, Your Highness? Green Dupatta asked. This is a medieval Indian story. There have to be some extraordinary phenomena. In this case, it is that the ceiling is only visible to those who are competent for the position they hold. Everyone else only sees a blank yellow ceiling. She paused and added, You could even use this to weed out the low performers in your next performance review cycle. And the king believed her. Now I know what you're thinking. The king and Green Dupatta's entire conversation and the entire secret project was a demonstration about lying. And practically, Raja had a year to think about that. Shouldn't that have triggered something in his mind? And failing all that, hadn't he at least read The Emperor's New Clothes fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen? The king hadn't, probably because this story preceded The Emperor's New Clothes. But that's not the only reason. The king had actually never ever lied in his life. So, he didn't expect Green Dupatta to be lying about this either. And yeah, the year long break, if anything, may have clouded the king's memories a bit instead of jogging them. The king was eager to go into the great hall, but Green Dupatta suggested that some of his companions go in first, and that they go in one by one. First was a lowly clerk. He went in a little nervously. He was doing more thinking than observing. The clerk was already nervous of failure, and when he looked up and saw nothing, he got even more worried. If he reported that he did not actually see anything on the ceiling, one of his bosses would be sure to fire him. So, he did the only thing that was guaranteed to keep his job safe. He lied about what he saw. The whole crowd looked at him when he stepped out, the question clearly in their eyes. The architect is brilliant, the clerk said. Such brilliance that is altogether too brilliant. A low-level officer went next. The psychology of the response was rather reinforced here, because the clerk had already seen something. The officer claimed that the details were amazing and intricate. He didn't have the words to describe them. They had to be seen to be believed. This went on up the entire management chain, until finally the king himself entered the hall. He knew every one of his officers had seen something. If he admitted to not having seen anything, it would be a PR disaster for him, and he would likely be deposed. So he stepped out and said,
Well, I can see my money has been well spent.
Green Dupatta asked calmly. What do you mean, Your Majesty? What did you see?
I saw amazing artwork. It blew my mind. The details were intricate. The architect is a genius.
He was regurgitating his employees' assessments. Could be. Even for the competent, it isn't guaranteed to show itself 100% of the time. I myself have never seen anything except a blank ceiling there, Green Dupatta said.
Oh, you haven't? But, my dear girl, you're really missing something, he insisted.
Are you positive? I can't say I care much for that kind of art, Green Dupatta continued.
Absolutely positive. Maybe I should get you a photograph of it then. Or I'll have someone paint a copy for you so you can see it. It's a wonderful piece of art. The architect is to be congratulated, the king replied.
Well, there is no architect, Your Highness, Green Dupatta replied. I see nothing because there is nothing on the ceiling. If you did see something, you may be overdue for an appointment with the royal optometrist.
I'm right here.
The optometrist said from the crowd.
His Majesty's eyes are perfect, as are mine.
Sheepishly, he added,
I didn't see anything on the ceiling either.
One by one, and even more sheepishly, the crowd all admitted they hadn't seen anything either. Green Dupatta continued, You've lied for the first time in your lives. You lied initially to save your job, but I gave you an out after that. And yet you persisted in the lie. Beyond the initial lie, you had no reason to continue lying, but you did. You were lying for the sake of lying alone. The king really should have disputed all that. He should have said, but the second and third lies are just corollaries to the first lie. They can be seen as an extension of the first lie. So that argument doesn't really work. Instead, his mind was furiously spinning as he thought about this self-inflicted, apocalyptic scenario. His people had now learned to lie. From now, nothing would be great about his kingdom. There would be crimes all over, and people would deny it. He would need to establish a police force, a judiciary, and all other kinds of infrastructure. Husbands would be lying to their wives, brothers to sisters, children to their parents. This was going to be the moral ruin of his kingdom. And Raja himself had sponsored it all. Raja thought that it all started because of Green Dupatta and her demonstration. But the damage was done. At this point, there was no going back. He would have to grin and bear it. Who knows, he might have retired before things reached a crisis point. He gritted his teeth and smiled at Green Dupatta.
Thank you for that demonstration. I shall look to your future with considerable interest. That was very valuable and has taught me a very important lesson.
He had just told another lie, with no reason for doing so. There, it really was getting easier to lie. That's all for now. Check out the links in the show notes for previous Punjabi folktales. In the next episode, we'll do a story of one of the members of the Holy Trinity again. This time, it's Shiva, the destroyer, whom we shall pick. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.